Okay. Okay. Well, on behalf of Father Stephen David and myself, my name is Kombazekos. I'm from AEST. I just want to take this opportunity and thank you all. Some of you, it's Saturday morning. I know it's quite late there for John in Pennsylvania, but look, I'd like to thank you for coming to this very, very special session. I want to thank firstly Father Stephen. When Father Stephen mentioned this to me a couple of weeks ago, I said yes, by all means, let's do this. So thank you, Father Stephen, for taking that initiative and involving myself and AEST, and thank you from my heart. Just a few housekeeping matters. If I could just ask you all, please, to have your mics off. As during John's talk, I'd just like to say a little bit about John. So Mr. John Heitzenrater is the headmaster of St. John Chrysostom Academy, which is in Pennsylvania. He has nearly 20 years teaching and administrative experience in classical schools. Mr. Heitzenrater began his career teaching history and humanities at the Lady Margaret Roper School and St. Peter's Orthodox Classical School in Fort Worth, Texas. He received his A.B. magna cum laude from the College of St. Thomas More, where he studied literature, philosophy, theology, classical languages, and history. He and his family were received into the Orthodox Church on Lazarus Saturday, 2019, after praying about it and researching Orthodoxy for over 2 decades. He and his wife, Christina, have 11 children, 7 girls and 4 boys, many of whom attend St. John Chrysostom Academy. So I would now like to hand it over to Father Stephen to lead us in prayer. Thank you, Father.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. O Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, both now and into the ages of ages. Amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Amen. Thank you, Con. Thank you again to AEST for agreeing to allow us to host this jointly. I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I want to thank John for his time. I think, John, this is your end of your second week of the new school year. So I imagine, if that's right, so I imagine you're pretty tired by now.
Yes.
And yes, I can imagine. And just to give you some context, I'm Father Stephen David. I'm the head of the St. John of Chrysostom Academy here in Brisbane, the first classical Orthodox school accredited in Australia. John is my mentor, and we see the Chrysostom Academy over in the US as our sister school, which is very important because, we draw from their guidance and their experience as a classical school. For those who are not aware, if any of you have ever read Douglas Wilson's book, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, you'd know that the revival in classical education in the US has been going on since the early 1980s. So we here in Australia are a little bit behind the ball. But we can draw on the experiences of our brothers and sisters in the US, and hence why we've got John here. So John, because I don't want to delay it any further, John, I was wondering if we could start off by
I'm not sure if you can hear me, Father, but you're actually frozen.
Everyone.
Yeah. You're frozen, Father. That's better. Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, good. There may be a delay. I don't know. Father Stephen and I do Zooms every couple of weeks, and so if there's a delay, just let me know. So how did I come to classical education? I actually went to Catholic boarding school, thought that I wanted to be a Catholic priest as a teenager. And I went to a very old-fashioned school. We would say now that was a classical school that I had attended, that really put an emphasis on reading literature, reading good literature, not just reading, whatever the latest New York Times bestseller is. And it developed in me because of teachers, because of good teachers who really loved their craft and loved us students. It really developed into a love for, a love affair with learning. So when I graduated from high school, I thought that I wanted to go to law school, and I looked around, and this was really at the dawn of the internet here in the United States. It was still the old dial-up, and I think it was Netscape that was at the local public library, and I typed in traditional classical Catholic colleges, and I discovered the College St. Thomas More. And at the time, the College St. Thomas More was just a bunch of buildings, just a bunch of houses within the University District in Fort Worth, Texas Christian University. And I went and visited, and it was a lot of nerdy, geeky people reading Dostoevsky and reading Plato and reading Aristotle. And I came back and I told my parents, I said, I'm taking the $250 that I have in my checking account, and I'm going to school down there. So I got on a bus and packed all my stuff into a suitcase and a backpack, and I got on a Greyhound bus and I went to college. And there was mentored by folks that had a very, very strong appreciation for understanding things as they are. And what I mean by that is, so much of education today is focused on an assembly line of, we just have to force so much information into students, and there wasn't really a wrestling with virtue. There was no wrestling with truth. And at the College St. Thomas More, I learned how to really read a book. In fact, some of the best discussions that I've ever had about literature were in the library, smoking cigarettes until 3 o'clock in the morning with folks, and drinking, 8 pots of coffee, and really trying to figure out what is Glaucon talking about in the Republic. And I met my future wife first day that I moved on campus, and she knew that I enjoyed history, and she had actually been a student at the high school there at the college. There was a college program and a high school program. And she, who hated history as a young teenager, ended up falling in love with history after one of her new teachers, Mr. Brian Smith, who's now head of the Orthodox Classical Schools Association here in the United States, taught her real history. And, started with learning about the place and about the people. And then, history is not an abstract set of events. History is a set of events that build upon each other. And there's virtue, and there's vice, and there's goodness, and there's evil. And all these things go into this narrative that forms what we call the Great Conversation. So fell in love with the great books at that time, and then ended up getting married pretty young. And when I graduated from college, I had an acceptance letter in my hand to another law school here in the United States. And I had been teaching kind of part-time at the Lady Margaret Roper School. And I went to my wife and I said, I really love having and teaching these things. And that's when I decided that I wanted to be a teacher. So, for us, classical education is really, you're standing on the shoulders of giants. Our teachers are the authors that we read. Plato is still talked about to this day because Plato is important. Aristotle is still important today. Dostoevsky is still going to be the greatest novelist of all time. And these things have stood the test of time. And that's really what I love about this education, is that I can read something again that I read as a young adult, and I have a new appreciation for it, that I'm able to pull in all of those things that I learned. Because for us, for classical educators, math is not a separate discipline. Math is connected with philosophy. It's connected with logic. Languages are connected with mathematics and with logic and with philosophy. History is connected with literature, literature with history. So there is a unified whole. And what we try to teach students is that when you break something down into its parts, there's a real danger in that nothing is ever just the sum of its parts. It is part of a unified whole. So that's really how I came to have an appreciation for it, just wanting that in my own life, wanting that in my children's life, and seeing the effects that it had on me and that it had on my wife. It's really neat to see 17 and 18 and 19-year-old kids sitting around and reading Madame Bovary and having insights into Madame Bovary. It really is something wonderful.
Thank you, John. And that's, having, I know for myself, I didn't have an education where I was exposed to classical literature and so forth. And I'm trying to play catch up now, not doing it very well, but I take your point about Dostoevsky. I just finished recently reading Crime and Punishment, and that's phenomenal.
It's so good. It's so good.
Keeps you going right to the end, and then it's kind of, it wasn't until the last page you just realize how profound a work it is about repentance.
Yep.
But you have to go through the journey. So it's that's. Now tell us a bit about you're now headmaster at Chrysostom Academy. Chrysostom Academy this is its second year, right? So tell us a little bit about the academy, your role in the academy.
Yeah, so I was a headmaster of a charter school in the United States. There are organizations that have specific charters from state governments to operate a public school within the public school system, but which is able to teach its own curriculum. So I was hired as a principal for an organization called Responsive Education Solutions in 2014. And I was hired to start a classical school like this in Southeast Dallas in Texas. So I was a headmaster, and then I was promoted to be director of history for the district. And then I worked under the superintendent as an assistant superintendent. And then in 2019, we lost a headmaster at one of the schools. It was the second biggest school within the Responsive Ed network. And they asked me if I wanted to go and lead that. Little did we know that in March of 2020, that COVID would hit. So I always have these themes for the school year. And that first year was Let Nothing Deprive You of Hope. And it really became an important thing to help my faculty and staff get through the very struggles that we had. But in the winter of 21, so this would have been February of 21, we had just had the big Texas freeze out where it was like minus 13 degrees and everybody's power went out and there was no heat. And I get this call from Brian Smith, who I just mentioned previously. And he said, what are you doing next year? And I said, well, I'm going to be running a school like I've been doing. And he said, well, we're trying to start a classical Orthodox school in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania. And I said, where is that? And he said, it's Eastern Pennsylvania. It's north of Philadelphia. And I said, there's no way that a brand new school is going to move a guy with 11 children across the country to open up a school. And he said, I've told him all about you. Send me your resume. You need to just come up and see what we're doing. So long story short, I flew up, looked at the property, looked at their business plan. They had already raised a significant amount of money. I knew that they were serious, and I went home. This was Holy Week of 21. I told my wife we're selling the house and we're moving to Pennsylvania. So in June, we moved up here, and I had talked to the board and told the board that we needed to really, for this to work right, we had to hit the ground running. And I made the suggestion that we actually opt for what we call a 0 year, where I'm able to write all the policies and procedures, get all of our handbooks and processes in place, and then advertise and open up our doors. And so that's what we did. And we opened up our doors in the fall of 22. We started out with 26 students. We added 2 more students throughout that first year. And then over the summertime, we doubled our numbers. We're up to 52. If we continue that, my plan here, my model is to build it to about 350 or 400 students, and then to encourage other families across the area to start sister schools. You can effectively know 400 kids. I mean, you can know them well. You can know their families well. If you get beyond that number, it starts to become very, very difficult. So this model and this type of education really work on its foundation is relationships. But the Lehigh Valley really was kind of an Orthodox Mecca within the Eastern United States. We're 70 miles from St. Tikhon's Monastery. We are just under 5 hours from a Romanian monastery of nuns outside of Pittsburgh. Within the valley, within the Lehigh Valley itself, I think that there are 10, maybe 11 Orthodox Christian churches. And I was really attracted to a pan-Orthodox school. I wanted to bring Syrians together with Ukrainians, with Russians, with Greeks, and focus on that shared heritage of what makes us Orthodox, and then really enliven the school with the various traditions that each of those bring to us. So, I always say that I'm the fool that always says yes. I believe that I can, what is the scripture, Father? If you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could do wonders. I'm that guy. I'm the guy that says, God will provide, Christ will bless. And I really believe that. And every opportunity that I have had to doubt, Christ has supplied and has just come in and said, this is going to be blessed. Continue moving forward. So I'm glad that I did. And my family thought I was crazy. My wife's family thought that we were crazy moving across the country. Father Alexei, who hired me, told me a couple weeks ago, he's like, yeah, when we first hired you, I told everybody on the board, I think this guy's crazy for moving up here. This is a guy that was had just hired me. But even they, who were totally financially invested, they were, I think they're just pleasantly surprised how beautiful this education is. And it really is a model that, it's soul forming, it's human forming. And that's a really, I mean, I always say people, we have the happiest students on the planet, because we're strict, but we're fair, and there's lots of grace and lots of compassion.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I think from that description, people can see why Chrysostom Academy is our sister school, because the St. John of Chrysostom Academy is effectively trying to model that here in Brisbane. John, you're not the only insane one. I could be doing a lot of other things rather than trying to build a school from scratch, especially when it's completely unknown. And I think, John, you and I have had conversations before. Classical education in Australia, I would be pretty sure that well over 90% of people do not know what I mean by that term when I say it. I think the number is actually higher than that. So part of what we're doing at the Academy is a lot of education of trying to, and sorry, I should say, AEST is also leading the charge on this in terms of educating the community about what is this term classical education, because you say classical, the only thing that comes to mind for most people is music, right?
Right.
Maybe books, but this notion that the classical education just is not a connection that's easily made. But your model, what we're trying to do here is, of course, you're very aware because I'm constantly picking your brain on these things. This is exactly what we're trying to replicate. Something I'd like you to touch on, because you're the headmaster there, and I'm going to move on to talk about what it's like being a parent of children in a classical school. But as a headmaster, because we don't have classical schools just down the road that we can go and visit, what really distinguishes Chrysostom Academy as a classical Orthodox school from the regular school down the road? What do you think are the distinguishing features? Because again, trying to get on top of what makes classical.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's a couple different things. This type of education really has a big emphasis on the necessity of virtue and learning. And it is decidedly not specialistic. And what I mean by that is, it started in colleges where, 65, 70 years ago, when you went to college, you went to be liberally educated, and liberal in the sense of liberalis, to free someone from, various errors, or to really hone in on how they think about things. Late 19th century, early 20th century, specialization became a thing. We can blame the Germans for that, with the PhD. And that separation of disciplines into, we're going to specialize in philosophy or literature, at the expense of learning these other things, started to become very popular. That model has snuck into public schools, so that you have what they refer to as the core, and then you can take electives in everything from automotive to music to extra sports. Those things are not bad in and of themselves, but they are a distraction if what you're trying to do with education is form full human beings. And I think that what distinguishes us is that we spend a lot of time making connections between the disciplines. So there's always history lesson in every single math class. There's a mathematician, or there is a discussion about the principles and ideas that they're talking about, where those came from, and how they got to us today. I always tell my students in literature that if you want to understand kind of the nuts and bolts of what happened when the Vikings raided Lindisfarne, you can go find any history book on the Viking raids of Lindisfarne. But if you want to know what really happened, even though it's biased to a certain extent, you go and you find, Brother Maynard's diaries that he's writing as the Vikings are coming in. So there's a big emphasis for us on reading primary sources. And we believe that children are smart enough to know when somebody's trying to feed them a line that's not right. Or if it's a little bit more sinister or a little bit more cloaked, that, we lead them on that discussion to try to see if, to look at the whole picture. So for us, knowledge is key, knowledge, content, content-rich instruction. And what that also looks like is that, I don't tell my teachers that they have to give me 9 weeks of lesson plans. If they are going through the history of Greece and they stop on a particular subject because they're really having good conversations about these things, then by all means, have those discussions. It's not about checking things off of a box. It's about getting students to think critically and logically and rationally about things. I think that the other big thing that we as a school do that you don't have at other schools is we focus a lot on wonder and imagination. Imagination in the sense that Copernicus didn't just, happen. Copernicus was somebody who did nature study every day. He was out and he was observing nature. And while you can read about fawns and deer in a science book, it's so much easier and better just to go out and observe them in their natural habitat. So we are very blessed here in the Lehigh Valley to have lots of forests. I mean, I was driving in tonight and there was 7 deer in the front lawn area. You have to get students to wonder and observe, get them off of their phones and get them looking up. If you don't do that, they're going to listen to and believe everything that comes across their computer, and they're going to miss out on life because they're not observing those things that are around them. So it's a slower paced education. It's decidedly not, the assembly line. We have no bells that signal the end of class here. And some of our classes meet every day. Some of our classes meet twice a week. Some of our classes meet 3 days a week. But we do have blocks of time in every day that you're not just sitting there and taking notes. That Socratic discussion and dialogue are very, very important. Now, there are some very good public schools out there. So I'm not knocking public education as a whole, but I do think that this education is superior. I think that when a child and a student recognize that their mind, heart, and will are all three needing attention, not just the mind, not just the heart, and not just their will. When they recognize that, you have somebody who is then able to really go out into the world and make a difference.
Thank you, John. Yeah, that the notion, especially of wonder and imagination. There's a wonderful book by Anthony Esselin, 10 Ways to Destroy the Imagination of Your Child, which for anybody who has children, that's a very good book to read on this. But I think in my mind, and I'm still very much an amateur student in classical education, I think that's one aspect of modern progressive education that is really absent. It's just about the scientific approach of just pure data, that kind of approach, and not allowing the moral and imagination to develop and to grow, and not nourishing that sense of wonder. John, I was wondering if you could kind of just roughly take us through a day in the life of Chrysostom Academy. How did your day start?
Sure. So I greet every student that comes into the school. We start the day with prayer. We have the reading from the life of a saint. We do our pledges, and then I make announcements about things that may be happening that day or things that are coming up over the next couple days. Our grammar students then go to their classes, and we start the day with phonics and mathematics. Our upper school kids, so upper school for us is 5th grade and above, and they're on a rotation between math, history, science, literature, Orthodox Christian studies, and Greek. We're doing a 2nd year of Greek with our older kids, and with our younger kids too. But the younger kids are really just learning songs and learning some of the chants. So it's math and phonics in the morning, and then maybe some read alouds for the little kids, for the little students. I call them the littles. And we let them kind of doodle and things like that while they're listening to the story. The teacher will stop and have them narrate back what they're hearing and what they're listening to. And then we have lunch, and our grammar school starts lunch about 15 minutes before our upper school, but there is about 15 minutes where we are all eating together. And then the littles go outside, they play, they have recess. There's lots of play in our grammar school. For us, education is most effective when it's very intensive for 20 to maybe 30 minutes, and then you give the child a break. So we will do 20 minutes of an intensive phonics, and then they get up and they kind of stretch around. Maybe they'll eat a snack, and then they go back into their instruction. And that is throughout the day. So I think that we have an hour to an hour and 15 minutes of recess built into every day. And then for us, for Orthodox Christians, eating is sacramental. So there may be times during the year where lunch is done in silence, especially during the Great Fast. And it also gives an opportunity for our older students to be examples, that our littles looking up at the older students, that's where they know they're going, that they're going to be upper school students, and they're going to be having these very nice discussions about things. The afternoons we spend in history, nature study, and science, and specials. All of our students do art and music. And we added theater to the rota this year. And then our 7th and 8th, 9th and 10th grade students also do logic and rhetoric. So it's a very full day, but it's a day that has enough leisure in it that the student doesn't feel that they're overwhelmed. There's a study hall every day where students are able to work for 45 minutes to get questions answered for things that they may be struggling with. And then once a week, we have house lunch. So we actually had our festival of flags today with our students. And what that is we decided very early on, being in Australia, you're probably more familiar with the house system because of the English roots than maybe they were here in the United States. But our houses are dedicated to an evangelist, each evangelist, because our mascot is a griffin, and that's a winged creature. So all the evangelists are also winged creatures. So there's this uniformity in the culture. And we eat house lunch. So the houses will eat together, and that's older students, younger students. And we will plan as house, we'll plan games. We will plan, events that the houses are competing against each other. We had students build a chariot last year, and they had their chariot races at the end of the year. So they have to know a little bit about what a chariot did and why it existed. And then there's that esprit de corps and that healthy competition amongst the students, that they're competing for house points, and you get house points by doing virtuous things. And if you do something that's not virtuous, or you do something that's wrong, you can lose a house point. You can get a demerit. And if you're the squeaky wheel that's getting the demerits, students are going to come together and be like, you're hurting the house. You need to take responsibility and do the right thing here. So it really does create a very good environment for children to really excel and be successful. So that's kind of in both a day and in a week what our days look like.
Thank you, John. And I probably should have covered this a bit earlier, but how many grades are you currently running in the second year?
So we added kindergarten and 10th grade this year. So we added kindergarten, 8 students to that, and then our ninth graders from last year moved up to 10th grade. So the goal is to be K through 12. I would like to add a college eventually. But for now, we're going to focus on the K through 12.
And that's every grade between.
That would be every grade. Yeah, I don't know. How do they do it? You have first form, second form, third form. How does it work in Australia?
So we have K to 12.
You do? Okay.
Your point of distinction is primary school. Well, now we've got the because we're a state system here in Queensland, it's prep, where it's known as kindergarten in other states. K through to 6, your primary school generally, and then 7 to 12, high school. But you've got a middle school there, and your day starts at what time and finishes what time? It's
a long day. We start at 8:30 and we go to almost 3:45.
Okay. So considering you're in your second year, what do you see as challenges for a classical school? And I'm thinking one of the things I'm very concerned about as somebody trying to start a classical school is, you go in it with the best of intentions, but it can very easily just slide into regular schooling, and we lose sight of being truly classical.
Yep.
If you can discuss challenges.
Yeah, the culture is the most important thing that a school exists for. And I spent a lot of time before we opened the school thinking about, if I could go to our blessed Lord and say, I want this, and this in a school. This is what I would like. That's really what I thought through. And I passed ideas off of everybody. For us, I mentioned the griffin just a second ago. Griffin is a representation of our Lord. It's a lion and an eagle. It represents his two natures. Those are little things that our students know, and that they can make that connection with the four evangelists. The school colors, we're blue, white, and gold. But we needed a fourth color in there, so we added in a dark gray, which goes nicely with that. The kind of symbiotic relationship in a classroom where we don't just throw a bunch of things up on the wall. It's very specific. What types of things we have. We have classical pieces of art throughout the school. The culture is the most important thing. It is also the thing that as you grow, people start to attack. People come in and they think that they know more about the organization because they've read a couple books, and they think that you should be doing things a certain way. And I always tell people, my door is always open. If you think that we could do something better, or we could do it in a better way, come to me and talk to me. We may agree to disagree, but I will hear a person out. But I'm very, very protective, and my staff, we spent a lot of training time our first year going over the culture and how we maintain that. So that is, I think, the biggest challenge that faces schools like ours. That's internal. External, you could be competing with some very good schools in your area, schools that have got high test scores, schools that have got students that have gone on to Oxford, or to, in our case, to Harvard or Princeton or Yale. And no matter how crummy these institutions have become, a parent is not going to look at anything other than the kind of buying power of the diploma that a child is getting. So that's a challenge. That's a challenge, especially with some of our more established families. And by established, I mean, a lot of the Greek families in the Valley came here, they started businesses, they paid a lot of money in taxes, they had a very big voice in the public school system. So even in the Valley, our grammar schools and public schools are not like grammar schools and public schools everywhere else. So being able to have the response for those who are outside of the organization that, what we talked about before, and inspiring that wonder and imagination, getting students to pause and look around them, to observe, getting them to think critically about something and not just throwing a book down because it's hard. I think that those are the things that, that will be challenging. And I think that the other thing is that you don't want to ever sell out the institution. And by that, I mean, I tell my families that have got a lot of money, if I call you to tell you that your child is in trouble, I'm not calling to attack you. I'm calling to discipline the child. And you will have, as you grow, you will have folks that think that they are entitled to certain things because they're huge supporters, both financially and, emotionally for the academy. But at the end of the day, you have to be, there has to be a blind justice system, either with discipline or with grading or with both. And those are hills that I will die on as a campus director. I won't sell out the program just because somebody's going to write me a check for $100,000. And that can be very hard for a board. You will have a board that will look at you and say, you need to change the grade, or you need to do this because we don't want to lose that money. And that can be very challenging for a campus leader to have the stomach, the moral compass to really stand his or her ground in that situation. So again, to recap, I think it's culture. I think it's having a response for the success and the track record of schools that you are competing against. And then third, being able to maintain the mission and vision in spite of whatever financial situation you find yourself in. That at the end of the day, people are signing handbooks, they're agreeing to behave in a certain manner, and that's blind. That doesn't know, the handbook doesn't know that you've got $100 million in the bank. You're signing this and saying my child is going to observe this. So I think those are the three big areas that I would pay attention to.
Thank you, John. So I thought we'd just change direction and focus on your role as a father. You've got 11 children.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, your daughter is at the college at St. Constantine School. Is that right?
She actually had some health issues. She's actually home with us now.
Right.
And she's met a nice Orthodox boy here in the Valley. So I don't know if she'll ever go back to Texas or not.
Sure.
But yes, she did do almost 2 years at St. Constantine.
Yep.
And so as a father, I'm biased. I mean, it's interesting because my children read things that I was older when I read. They're getting to read these things at a much younger age, so they are they're getting exposed to these ideas that I didn't get exposed to when I was their age. It also makes having conversations with them about the world and about their formation a lot easier. They're not just hearing it from dad or from mom. That if you want to teach your daughter's purity, father, at 16, you have them read Madame Bovary. Because reading Madame Bovary at 16 will show a young lady what happens when you do not lead a virtuous life. It is a stark visual, literary just jolt to a young teenage girl. That's something that my kids don't want to hear me talk about morals. They don't want to hear me talk about, your dress is too short. You can't dress like that to go to church. So it really does set up an opportunity for them to think things through. And I'm very hard on my children. I demand excellence. But I also understanding human nature, that my son's excellence may be different than my daughter's excellence, that those things are going to be different. So my children love coming to school. There's the typical kind of teenage angst whenever they have to get up early and get to class, but when they're here, they're in an environment which is challenging them. Kids love to be challenged. And when they start to understand things that they didn't think that they could understand as a parent, that is really rewarding for me, because there's always that question, right? Are you doing the right thing? Should my daughter, who wants to be a doctor, should she go to the local public school? Because they have 10,000 different science classes that she could take. And you just have to stop yourself and say, yes, but she's not going to have the foundation. I would be more comfortable having a doctor who has read the classics and understands good and evil. I would rather have that than somebody who has no conscience, no moral compass, that just is turned loose because they're smart. We don't want know-it-all pagans, and that is a danger. We also don't want to be cliquey, weird Amish Orthodox. So you have to engage the world, but you also have to validate their humanity. They have to be able to make mistakes. We spent a lot of time this week talking with our students about failure. Failure is a great thing. We always use the example here because we're so close to Hershey. Hershey, filed for bankruptcy 4 times before he hit it big. That's jolting for a child to think about. Like, wow, he failed and he didn't give up. We talk about grit and just seeing things through. And if you want something bad enough, you're going to have to fail to get to it. I failed at a lot of things in my life. My Russian history class in graduate school, Father, I failed the first 2 tests because I couldn't remember the names. And I went to my professor and he said, you need to come up with a jig to remember the names so that when you're sitting down, you can remember the song and how it goes. And that's what I did. So if you want something bad enough, you're going to work for it. And that idea of grit is really lacking in today's world. And this environment is full of just forcing kids to embrace that difficulty.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think that's why nurturing wisdom and virtue as being key objectives behind a classical curriculum and an education is so fundamentally important. Those virtues are going to carry with them throughout their lives, and it's going to be what makes them the people that they are. I always think about, I think it's Dr. Christopher Perrin who says, don't look at the student when they finish school, you look at the student when they're 80.
Yeah.
Has a classical education really benefited that person? What sort of a person have they become over the course of their life? And it's wisdom and virtue, 2 words that don't appear in the Australian curriculum. And that's so much the emphasis, I think, of a classical education for us in terms of what we see the objective to be. So thank you for that. Look, I think at this point, Con, we could probably open up the floor and let people ask questions. You can use the chat, or also people can unmute their microphones and ask questions directly. We'll just try and, of course, do it in an orderly way so that this format does not really allow for multiple speakers at once. So yes, I will throw it over to you. Anyone have any pressing questions?
I'll start off with a not so pressing one, just one on just the layout of the school, or the admin of the school, John. You mentioned your younger pupils, you refer to them as the grammar students or grammar school. Does your school use the model of grammar, logic, and rhetoric to describe the ages and stages, or is that what's the or the reasoning for that, rather?
Not specifically, no. So grammar school was kind of the buzzword in the 1930s and 40s in the United States. For us, grammar school is kindergarten through fourth grade. I detest the term middle school. I don't know why I detest it, but it's just something that kind of grates in my soul whenever I hear it. So our upper school is fifth grade through high school, but there is that group, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth, that are lower upper school. The Dorothy Sayers' essay on the lost tools of learning, I have a love and hate relationship with, because I don't think that if you went back to the Middle Ages, that your typical French or typical Englishman would have said, I'm studying the logic stage right now. I'm in the logic stage right now, or I'm in the rhetoric stage right now. They just would have said, I'm going to go and read Plato. I'm going to go read Aristotle. I'm going to read Averroes. I'm going to read all these guys, and I'm going to learn logic, and I'm going to learn how to speak, and I'm going to learn, how to talk. The quadrivium is actually more of a distinction with arithmetic, music, geometry, and what's the other one? And music. That distinguishing thing actually exists. Like, people would go and study music. But no, when I say grammar, I am specifically talking about that stage where we're focusing on numeracy and literacy. Those are the two big things. And also getting students to have a very broad understanding of history. So they will cover, in kindergarten, they'll talk about their home, their city, and their state. And then when they go into first grade, they talk about their state and their country. And then towards the end of their first grade, beginning of their second grade, then we start talking about those areas around the world, once they understand how human beings interact. And that first interaction, of course, is what we have with mom and dad. So does that answer your question, sir?
And I should add, terminology between the US and Australia is not necessarily 100% compatible, but also something to bear in mind, and John will correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is, for example, John, in your situation, if you don't take any government funding, you can basically run the curriculum that you want.
That's correct.
Now, here in Australia, it doesn't matter. All Australian schools, because we're so heavily regulated, must implement the Australian curriculum and the outcomes of the Australian curriculum. So we don't have that choice. If we as an academy chose not to take Commonwealth state funding, we would still be required to follow and meet those outcomes. So it's a very different system between our two countries.
Yeah.
So
I saw some questions coming up, Father.
Yeah. Do you want me to dish them out for you, or would that help? Yeah.
So I see that the first one is recommend a book that a teenage boy could read to encourage chastity. I just did with my 8th grade class this last year, my 7th and 8th grade class. We actually read the life of Saint Anthony in our Orthodox Christian Studies program, and it's short. It's very beautifully written, and it will start a number of conversations that you can have with your child. I think that young adults need heroes. It's why, it's why they think that their parents are not cool when they hit 6th or 7th grade and their friends are the best. They want heroes, and they want the Michael Jordans and whatnot. And what we try to do is we try to turn that focus to the saints. When St. Anthony goes out into the desert, he's just a couple years older than some of these students that are in our school. and he has this kind of life-changing experience where he goes out into the desert. And when you read that and you have a young man read that, there's a pause. There's a pause in the student when they read that and they think to themselves, my goodness, I'm really weak. These really super amazing feats that, that somebody like St. Anthony did. So I would focus on the lives of the saints. As far as a piece of literature, I would have you could have a teenage boy read. They could read Madame Bovary as well. It won't be as effective as it is with the young ladies. We have our high school boys read To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a very, very difficult book to read, but it shows the consequences of not keeping oneself, in check. I can think a little bit further on that, and send Father Stephen some recommendations for that.
Thank you, John. And if I can just ask, if you've got a question, please make sure it's addressed to everyone, just so we can see it. We can, I think actually on that question, John, the thought that came to mind, because I'm a huge Tolkien fan. The characters like Aragorn and so forth in Lord of the Rings, just there's so much virtue to be learnt from that. I think it's wonderful. Now there's a question here from Jonathan. How does the school deal with cultural intrusions such as mobile phone use, alternative ideologies, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so let me deal with technology first. We are not anti-technology, but we do believe that technology should be, that there's an appropriate time for technology, and that most of the time school is not one of those things. So students are not allowed to have mobile phones. We're also very strict in our handbook about telling students that, you put your whole life out there on the internet, through social media and through some of these websites. And if you do something silly or stupid that's going to get you into trouble, you're going to have to live with that for the rest of your life. So there was a big scandal here in the Lehigh Valley where some of the 15-year-old and 16-year-old students were sending back and forth inappropriate pictures between themselves. And one of the young men was arrested for distributing child pornography because he sent it to all of his friends, and the child was a minor. So we were very, very, very vocal about the dangers of social media. And I always tell my students that if something happens on their phone that ends up in my school, it then becomes my job to deal with it. So if we catch a student with a phone, we confiscate it. The first time that we confiscate it, it's $10 that the parents have to pay to get it back. That usually fixes it. If a child is caught with a phone again, it's $100. And by that point, parents are usually just so fed up that they'll take the phone away from the child. As far as other cultural intrusions like bad ideologies, I think that what we do is so we have a very clearly defined statement as a school, as a private Christian school, about the Orthodox Church's position on transgenderism, homosexuality, and all these different things. Our first approach, if a student were to come to us with gender dysphoria or with all this other difficult kind of moral questions, is to approach that child with love and compassion, to bring parents into the conversation. But the handbook is very clear. Our parents have to sign off that they are taking their kids to liturgy, or they are taking their kids to mass if they're Roman Catholic, or that they're going to church on Sundays. That they will, our 5th grade through 12th grade students, we have an honor code, and we talk about temperance, and we talk about integrity, and we talk about humility, and we talk about charity. And we spend a lot of time at the beginning of the year going through what those things mean. When you say this honor code, you would make this honor pledge in front of the whole school. You're promising to live by these things. And we would never punish a student for sin. That's a good opportunity for a spiritual father and a spiritual child to have repentance and all these different things. But if they're coming in and they're waving a flag, I won't put up with it. It's not, my handbook is pretty lock solid. If you don't abide by these things, you will be asked to leave the school. So, when I first read the statement, Father Alexi showed me the statement. I kind of jokingly said, have you had a lawyer look at this? And Father Alexi said, I have two lawyers in my parish that argued before the Supreme Court of the United States on various issues. He says, and they're ready for a fight. So that's, I think you make it very clear to families. We are unreservedly Orthodox Christian in our approach to these things. Maybe you can't do that in Australia. I'm guessing you can. Father, can you, as a Christian school, I would go back to the principles of the Orthodox Christian faith and just say, this is what we believe. This is what we believe. This is what we believe. But I don't, I also don't, I don't squash discussions about kind of pop culture things. I like to know what my kids are viewing. I like to know what they're listening to. I like to know what they're looking at. So I will listen, and I ask my teachers to listen to the conversations that are going on with students. And if something doesn't sound right, come bring the faculty into the discussion. We'll bring parents into a discussion. Hey, what's this all about? And then we'll bring a child in. So it's a healthy balance between you recognizing that there are these horrible things in the world, but also wanting your kids to come and talk to you when there are problems.
Thank you, John. And this kind of feeds into the next question. Are the students attached to a spiritual father in the school?
Yeah, so we have 6 or 7 priests that come. One will come once a month to hear confessions. Father Alexi, as the chairman of the board, everybody wants to go to Father Alexi. He's amazing. I hope you get to meet him when you're here, Father. But we leave that discussion with, to the parents. We encourage the parents to have it, but we are, unreservedly Orthodox in the school. So we observe all the fasts. We tell parents that if a child is not going to observe the fast, that they can't just come and brag that, that they're not observing the fast, to try to be respectful for that. And, we try to get, even our littlest students who may not be old enough completely to go to confession, if they're not scared when they see, Father there, and they're like, oh, I want to go to confession, they start working with them at that point, to bring it in. But we talk very highly of our spiritual fathers. All the faculty talks very highly of their spiritual fathers, so that there is that, there's that constant discussion that kids are hearing that, when I have a problem, I'm going to go ask my spiritual father. And we also talk, we also use wording with students like, you don't have a blessing to do these various things. So we get them into the habit of thinking about asking for blessings to do things. I'm not a priest. I hope to be a cleric someday. But, as the headmaster, my role I do take is as a spiritual role. So, getting them in the habit of really thinking through what it is that they're asking and making sure that they have, if we proceed with the blessing of a father confessor, we can never fail. So does that answer the question?
I think that came from Con.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question, 2 parts. Do you consider the school a mission at all? Or is it specifically for Christian families? And secondly, how do you set your fee structure?
Okay. So yes, we do look at it as a mission. I don't know if we'll ever attract non-Christian kids, but we do have a number of students this year that are not Orthodox, which was not the case last year. Number of Roman Catholic kids who have come to us, and I have one Protestant student this year whose parents are sympathetic to Orthodoxy. They're tired of the kind of the mega churches that they've been in, and they want something a little bit more liturgical. As long as a child, as long as a family is not, if they can in conscience sign off on the handbook where we talk about the kind of Orthodox Christian principles that guide the school, they have a place here, you know. So I need to reserve the answer on that because I don't have a lot of experience right now with non-Orthodox kids. At my last school, because it was a public charter school, I was doing all kinds of Orthodox Christian things with them that they didn't even know were Orthodox Christian until kind of at the very end. And I remember I had a Hindi family that came up to me, and I was talking about Saint Paisius and the fable of the bee and the fly, and this Hindi father came up to me and he said, I don't know what it is, but you have me all fired up about this dude that lives on this mountain in Greece on Mount Athos, you know. So yes, we do use it as a mission, but you know, we're not ashamed of who we are. So we're very, very verbal with parents whenever they come here. What was the second part of the question, Father? I'm sorry.
Set your fee structure.
Yeah, so we did a pretty extensive study of local schools. There are a number of Catholic schools in the Lehigh Valley, so we were able to kind of look at how they structure their tuition. And then we have Moravian Academy, which is a preeminent elite private school that's charging just astronomically high prices. And we kind of took the average of those, and that's kind of where we came in for tuition. I don't believe in nickel and diming our families to death. So our families have to, we have a small fundraising fee. I believe that every family should fundraise, but I don't want kids taking home the chocolate box to sell the chocolate bars. So we have a fee for that, and then we have an activity fee, and then tuition, and that's it. We keep it affordable. It may be non-sustainable. I'll just be honest with you. I mean, it costs to educate one student in the United States. The average is $15,000 or $16,000 a year. We're charging significantly less than that. But Christ will provide. I really believe that the amount of students who will be able to afford full tuition, I think will make up for those differences of students who can't. And we also have a discounted rate. You know, first, if there's multiple siblings in a family, we give a clergy discount to students of clergy. And then our teachers who teach here, if they have children in the academy, they get a 50% discount on tuition. Everybody pays something, even those who have gotten financial aid. Our philosophy is that every parent has to have buy-in into the school. That makes them invested, and that will mean that they will take things seriously. Even if it's just $1,000, every family pays something.
Thank you, John. Just moving through this. There's a question here. Can we get access to the curriculum that you use?
Yeah, so my most prized possession as a headmaster is my curriculum map. It took me 2 years of blood, sweat, and tears. But there's nothing proprietary about it outside of the fact of the way that I set it up. So I'll be happy to share that with you, Father. You know, just you know, I wouldn't want it like distributed past you.
Yes.
But as a sister school, I'm fine with sharing that.
That's come from somebody who's sitting on this discussion. We'll take that offline. Now,
Sure.
another question, you mentioned that the school is pan-Orthodox. Is the school guidance or belong to a particular Orthodox jurisdiction? I think I know the answer to this, but or is it completely independent from them in terms of governance?
It is completely independent in terms of governance, but our bylaws for the board dictate that there must be at least one member from each Orthodox jurisdiction on the board, which is a beautiful thing for us because there's a plethora of individuals who want to serve. There's a couple reasons I don't want to have a specific jurisdiction, their rubber stamp of approval, because as Orthodox Christians, we tend to be territorial. I don't want my Ukrainian kids to come to a Russian Orthodox school and feel like they can't come because of stuff that's going on overseas. If it's at a Greek church, that immediately kind of has this aura of this is a Greek school, and therefore my kids will not fit in. So we purposively have done that. Now that will be challenging when we seek a bishop to have a chapel on campus. Will we go to Rokor or will we go to the Antiochians? The Antiochian bishops and metropolitans tend to be very educational friendly. I know that John Mark Reynolds at St. Constantine, Bishop Thomas has been very good to them. But I'm a Slavophile father, so I would love to have the entomins of an OCA priest or whatnot, or OCA jurisdiction. But schools, bad things can happen at schools. So bishops are oftentimes, a little weary about, putting their stamp on something if they don't fully understand or know who it is. So I'm still building those relationships. Very careful about who we hire and, what we project to the public. We're very, very careful in what we do so that we don't cause scandal that a bishop would look at and say, I don't want to have anything to do with that. We've been very open with inviting bishops. Our end of the year commencement will have a hierarch coming and celebrating. So we want everybody's prayers and support. But I don't want to be under a specific jurisdiction for fear of alienating my other kids.
Thank you, John. Next question is about how do you, regarding staff selection, and I know for us in building the St. John of Chrysostom Academy, I think that this is our biggest challenge, finding staff who are going to be the right fit for the culture, as you mentioned earlier, because the culture is really paramount, right? So your staff have to be on board, and it's not easy. So how do you go about your staff selection?
So I think from a logistical level, we hit all the major kind of Orthodox publications in the United States. There's an orthodoxjobs.com organization that we advertise on, and then various classical institutions that are accrediting agencies will also have job postings. We only hire Orthodox Christian teachers because of the ministerial aspect of what we do. Not every country is able to do that. I know that because of discrimination, some countries you can't do that, but because it's a ministry, we're able to only hire Orthodox Christian teachers. That someday may not be completely long-term. We may have to amend that as we grow. But I look for teachers who understand classical education. or teachers who have a ton of educational experience, but are fed up in the public school system and want to come to a classical school and are docile and wanting to learn. So I'm sure that everybody who's on the call knows who Father Thomas Hopko is. I'm sure that they're familiar with Father Alexander Schmemann. Father Alexander Schmemann's granddaughter and Father Thomas Hopko's daughter is my first and second grade teacher. And she taught in public schools for a number of years. And then she went and worked at a little Orthodox Christian preschool. And she came to me last year and she's like, I don't understand classical, but I want to learn classical. So that, just being honest with your teachers, you need, as a brand new school there in Australia, you don't want everything to be brand new. You need to have some teachers that have got some experience. And if you're bringing in teachers with experience and they're not classically trained, I would get the board to invest money in training them. There are very good programs around. And again, once people understand kind of how this education works and how you teach it, they don't want to ever go back to the public schools, because they're able to actually teach, which is what we believe in.
Thank you. And then maybe the last question for tonight, your time, is how do you approach assessment? And there's I know you jump on some of the blogs and the other things. This is a big topic in classical education, I know, across the US. Like how do we properly assess and not get bogged down in assessment? So
yep. Yeah, so that's a very good question. So I told my staff and my families our first year of operation, we were not going to do any outside assessments. We weren't going to do California testing. We weren't going to do Iowa basic skills. We were just going to let the students learn. I then got a call from a gentleman at Classical Learning Test, CLT, which started out as an alternative to the Scholastic Aptitude Test, the SAT, and the ACT. And they have developed benchmarks for third grade through high school. They are excellent. And most of them are only one day for one morning that a student takes the assessment. I'm a data geek. I like looking at trends. I like looking at, this first grade class, they all got this, but they didn't get this. Why didn't they get these points here? And then being able to go back and kind of massage the curriculum so that they're getting those things. Do I ever believe that a standardized test is the end all be all of a student? Absolutely not. But for progression's sake, I do think that it can be useful. We wouldn't stop any instructional time. We're not going to sacrifice content to prepare for a test. For us, the curriculum that we're doing is the preparation. Okay, there may be things in the preparation that we could do better, but we're not just going to teach to the test so that our kids get high scores on it. I'd rather it be an honest assessment of what that looks like.
Well, unless anybody has any last burning question before we call it, I was going to call it a night for John, but of course it's just our morning here. Actually, there's one question here. In America, there's an assembly of Orthodox bishops. Does this assembly and other Orthodox jurisdictions in America ever discuss the importance of an Orthodox classical school? Don't know
whether it's amazing. It is amazing that they have all these initiatives. I'm gonna just kind of speak off the cuff for a second. There are all these initiatives with Orthodox bishops. We need to have like the Sunday school after party where we're drinking Kool-Aid and talking about Saint Philaret. That's all great, but when you try to talk to them about education, the old guard still defaults to the public school system. Have your kids come to Sunday school. They can go get their education in the public school. That trend is changing because you're starting to get hierarchs who themselves have been classically educated. They may have gone to Thomas Aquinas College in California. They may have gone to Hillsdale, all these different institutions. So the trend is changing. But I think that one of the beautiful things about this movement within Orthodoxy, and one of the things that makes it better than the kind of Catholic school parochial model is, there is room for each school to be its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is super important. You want a school that has its own culture, its own ethos, its own traditions, its own songs, its own mascot, its own colors. We have created traditions. We had our Festival of Flags today. That is where at the end of the year last year, we retired our house flags. We folded them up, and it was the official ending of the school. Today, we had our youngest student in the school come and ring the bell, because even though we've been in session for the last umpteen days, the first day of classes of real education starts on Monday, because we've been going through handbooks and we've been going through, this is how you address somebody. And the flags came back out, they were hung up, and then we had our house sorting ceremony into those various houses. So all of the old kids that were in their house stayed and cheered for the new kids that were coming in. And those are traditions that we've created. We also have crown games in the fall and Griffin games in the spring. We have a forgiveness service that we do the Friday before Cheese Fair Sunday, and one of the local diners provides ice cream for the kids afterwards, because it's like the last hurrah for ice cream. Those are all little things that your students are going to get super stoked about, that are so important. And if I would actually fight if the Canonical Assembly of Bishops came together and said, we want to have an education office that starts schools, I would absolutely be against it. Bureaucracy doesn't do anything other than cause more paperwork and cause more trouble. You have to give freedom to, I don't think, Father, I've ever once said to you in our discussions about St. John Kronstadt, you need to do this, ever. I have said that there's this way that you could do it, but it really has to be its own thing. It has to be a living, breathing organism. And I think that that's what we should try to preserve.
John, I cannot tell you how grateful I am for your time. I know this is the end of I mentioned, the end of your second week, because of course your school year starts in September, which for us in Australia is kind of really weird.
Yeah.
We are literally at the bottom of the world, so we, of course, do everything differently. Thank you for all of your time and spending the time with us. It's always a blessing, not only for the support that you've given us at the Academy, but just these kinds of sessions where people can actually learn more about classical education. May God bless all the work of yourself and your staff at the Chrysostom Academy. We want to see classical education thrive and grow. I want to thank AEST Con. Thank you very much. And all of the members of AEST for their support and the work that they do here in Australia to really publicise classical education. I think it's fundamental. Yes, and I hope that we can present in the future. We can present more of these types of sessions as joint initiatives to help. In the last 4 to 5 years, I feel like there's been a real change in Australia. More people have become conscious and aware of. Look, I know COVID was not great, but it brought a lot of benefits. And I think people have really, one of those things is people to really think about education, how they educate. Yeah. Surprisingly. So yes, thank you, everybody. Con, did you have any last final word? Sorry.
Yes. I'd like to echo what Father Stephen just said. Thank you, John. I'm sure that all of us have found the session very informative, very productive, very enlightening. Thank you for taking us on this journey. Because
Absolutely.
I always say to Father Stephen that it's a journey that we're all on. And as Father said earlier, it's just beginning, but it's a beautiful journey. I'll be very quick. Those of you who don't know much about ACES, we do offer events. We are going to be offering a PD with it's organized by beautiful teaching Adrian Fries, whom John knows very, very well. We're going to be having a session called Teaching History Classically. And that's going to be on October 7th. So it's about a month away. It's on a Saturday morning. And the presenter will be Mark Signorelli, who is a classical Catholic high school teacher in New Jersey, I believe. I'm not sure if you know him, John, but he will be speaking to us.
He's great. He's great.
There you go. We've heard that from John. So that's $30 Australian. We still have many places available. So I know that some of you here already have registered. So, and also very quickly, we're also introducing a book club. And Adrian Fries will be running this. And the book that we'll be doing, I'm sure John's read this book, or most it's called Awakening Wonder by Stephen Turley. Yes, thumbs up there from John. So that we're going to have a book club as well. So like Father Stephen saying, we're trying to get the word out there about classical education. And we thank you, Father Stephen. Thank you, John. I really enjoyed this session, and thank you for allowing us to record it. So I might just